Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of The Budget Witch. I've been debating for a while what my first episode should be, and I really want to have some sort of order to all this so that you get to know me and you get to know what I'm all about. So I decided what better way to basically introduce myself and get you all used to this channel than to talk about how I came to find witchcraft and Wicca and basically the transition to that and how it's affected my life thus far. So funnily enough, when I talk about the coming out, I'm not talking about me coming out as a witch, because that didn't come until much later, and even then was met with mixed reactions from my family. I refer to the coming out as when my father decided that he was going to come out as an atheist. Now this was kind of a big deal. One side of my family, which was my mother's side, due to my parents being divorced, my mom was a Baptist, and she was making us go to church every Sunday. She basically got us the gift of being baptized one year for Christmas along with a Bible and expected us to be super excited. She introduced religion into our lives kind of late, I would say. It was better for my sister. She was a lot younger, but by that time I was already older and wondering where I fit into the world, and then she just kind of shoved me into church, and I really didn't appreciate it, and I didn't take well to it. My father, on the other hand, his family had always been Catholic, and, they were against swear words and using the Lord's name in vain. Nowadays, it's not that big of an issue, but my grandparents were real sticklers about it. And so the church was always influencing them, and I noticed that from a young age, but never really dove much into it because I didn't see my father that often, and my grandparents, of course, died when I was very young. So I didn't really have a big relationship with the church, but I understood that the church was supposed to be something that was important, and that any religion outside of the church, well, I didn't think that anything outside of Christianity existed, because I was never introduced to other religions. I was just told, Christianity was the religion. And I had friends that went to all different types of churches that were in that realm of Christianity. So I had, agnostic friends. I had Pentecostal friends. I had, of course, the Baptist friends. And then I had friends that were Catholic as well. But I all knew that essentially it was supposed to be the same religion, just practiced a little bit differently. But long story short, my father came into the kitchen one day while my sister and I were eating, and he basically told us that he had to say something. And then he mentioned that he was an atheist. Now, I had no idea what this was. My sister had no idea what it was, and she was freaking out. And my dad told us very bluntly that being an atheist meant that he just did not believe in God. Now, this was a huge thing to my sister, who started freaking out again. But this actually awoke something in me. For the first time in my life, I realized that I had a choice. And so this message, this moment, was actually very profound in my journey. Because when he said, I don't believe in God, then I realized that if I didn't have to believe in God, then there must be other possibilities out there. And that I now had that choice to go out and find the religion or path or whatever that fit me the best, even if that also meant that in the end I might be an atheist too. What I think is ironic about the coming out portion of the story is that around the same time, I was fighting with my feelings for the same gender. Obviously, I figured out not really late in the game, but I started to accept rather late in my high school years that I actually liked other women. And it was around this time that I met a girl that I actually really liked, and I ended up having the biggest crush on. I found her fascinating, everything about her. She just seemed very wise for her age, and while I was going down this journey of religion, I ended up mentioning to her that, my mom was Christian and that my dad had recently just come out as an atheist, and that I had so many choices, and that it was crazy because I just never really realized what my options were. And she just kind of chuckled and she said, well, I never really had to worry about that. And I was like, oh, is your family not religious? And she told me, well, they're not religious in the way that you would expect. I've always been a witch. And at the time, I kind of laughed because in middle school, everybody was practicing witchcraft. I mean, that was just the thing to do for a preteen young woman, was to go to a sleepover and cast a love spell or whatever. Like, witchcraft had been around for a minute now. Like, not a long time, but it was something that was emerging, and it really took off in middle school, but I thought it was just like kids pretending that they were going to Hogwarts or something. I didn't really think it was a real thing. I just thought it was a bunch of nonsense that was more like a game than anything else. So I kind of laughed, and I told her how I felt about it in a more mature, tactful way. And she told me that it probably wasn't nonsense. She said that witches actually did cast spells, but she told me that they weren't the type of spells that one would expect. It wasn't like Harry Potter. It wasn't like Hocus Pocus. She said that it was all based in your natural energy and your willpower. And she said that it wasn't a guaranteed success when you cast a spell. You were more or less putting your intent into this spell to help get it along, so that possibly this thing could happen. That you increase your chances of gaining a fortune, or that you increase your chances of finding true love. She said it's not 100% guaranteed, and it's based in your own will, and your own energy that you put into this intent, that you put into this goal that you want to achieve. And at the time, that actually kind of made sense. I always believed in natural energy. I always believed that we had power over basically anything if we really put our mind to it. I felt like we as a people, we as humans, could do more than we believed we could, and that we had a lot of dormant energy laying inside of us just waiting to be brought out by means. And so this was something that actually resonated with me, and I was actually interested to hear more. And then she started talking about Greek mythology, the belief in multiple deities, the belief in multiple spirits, that everything had a spirit, everything had an essence to it. And I felt like I had finally found something that I could get into. I loved Greek mythology. I always wondered how people could believe in so many gods at one point, and then it all just focused into one god. I always wondered, how the Greek mythology, how that belief in all those different gods just disappeared off the face of the planet. Same with the Romans. It just baffled me that this religion could have been, just halted. And then she explained that we kind of don't talk about what really happened and how those religions basically got destroyed when the, different crusades happened to abolish paganism. And but she said that she lived with her mom and her two other sisters, and they were all witches. And she said that she had grown up as a witch, so they did rituals to honor nature, they did magic to bring good upon the world. And I was like, wow, a religion full of peace and love that honored nature and the planet and all the spirits. Like, it just seemed very fantastical, and it was something that I really wanted to look into. And I don't think I wasted a moment. I mean, and it really helped that I had a crush on this girl, because then I was super obsessed with it. I had to know what it was. I had to know what it was like. I had to know how easy it would be to get into it, because if I was a witch and she was a witch, I mean, at the time, I just saw that as some match made in heaven, and it just seemed absolutely perfect. Alright, so I'll be honest. I'll be the first to admit that when I get into something, I obsess over it. That means I am looking up everything in my power, and witchcraft was no exception. Because I'd heard about it in middle school, I went to talk to all of my friends about it, but they had moved on from that stuff, and I don't think they really understood it at the time. And when I found out that none of my friends really knew about witchcraft, and if they did, they told me to stay far away from it because it was the devil's work, cough, basically, I just had to start looking for myself. Now, I didn't really have computer access at my mother's house, but luckily my father let me use his computer every weekend. This was still back in the good old days of dial-up, so I had to be really selective about what I was looking for. And so I started looking up resources on witchcraft. Somehow I ended up looking up witchcraft in Indiana, which is where I was at the time. And I ended up finding the Temple of Ishtar. And through them, I was able to look up an introduction, I was able to find a little slight history of witchcraft, and basically I was able to read up on how it was like a self-initiated thing, that you could be a solitary witch or you could be in a coven, and I looked up all of this stuff, like the different gods and goddesses that they worshipped, the different like paths that you could take in witchcraft, everything from using herbs to casting circles, and it was all so overwhelming. There was a lot more to it than what I thought. Based on what my crush had told me, I thought it was just standing around and chanting. I really felt more like it would have been like Charmed, the show Charmed, and it was in a sense, but then again it wasn't. There was a lot more involved. There were a lot more supplies, and it just seemed very complicated and precise. And I would find out that it wasn't. But let me tell you, because I was Googling this stuff, I started talking about it non-stop. I was just like, oh, I know this, or did you know this was this? And I also became super defensive when people were like, oh, have you been looking into witchcraft? Like, you know, you're gonna summon evil, don't you? And I'm like, that's nonsense. You don't summon evil. Like, it's not even about that. And I would go into the whole, like, nature, love, peace, which is true, you know? I was telling them the truth, but I was doing it in a way that was, like, overly aggressive. And sure enough, it started to rub my crush the wrong way. She tolerated it at first, but then when I moved from Google to books, that's when she started doing the whole, oh my god, you're copying me, or oh my god, you're only doing this because I am a witch. Like, that's when she started to get a little impatient with me and my shenanigans, because I felt like I was super knowledgeable. I felt like I'd finally found this path that fit me so well, and I finally felt like I was going to be the best witch that ever existed on the planet. And it kinda got worse from there.